So what is an assembly? An assembly is simply a placeholder for your subassemblies. If I select it right here, you'll notice that that is the assembly. To create an assembly, you simply go to the Home tab, Create Design panel, and then the Assembly drop-down right here. So what are subassemblies? Well, subassemblies are the building blocks of your corridor. Think of them as like Lego pieces that you put together to design your corridor model. This is a subassembly, as well as the rest of these are also subassemblies. As far as where the assemblies and subassemblies exist in the Prospector tab, if you navigate to the drawing that you're in, Assemblies category, you will see that you have all the assemblies listed here that are in your drawing. Again, if you want to right-click on these, you can actually zoom to them to put them in your view, especially useful if you have a large amount of data in this drawing. You can right-click on the individual sides of the subassembly as well if you need to. One of the other really cool aspects of Civil 3D 2013 is that you can actually remove the assembly from your model space and it will still be available in the drawing to use for modeling. We'll keep ours open for now. As with everything in Civil 3D, there are going to be styles and settings you need to be concerned with. If I go to the Settings tab, I have the Assembly and Subassembly categories. The assembly style is how this actual line should display. Nothing spectacular there. The subassembly, however, does not contain any styles, and you would only set feature and command settings for the subassembly. The reason this is that there are some additional categories in different locations that control how a subassembly will display. Before we talk about those styles and settings, let's talk about what makes up a subassembly. So what does make up a subassembly? A subassembly is comprised of link, points, and shapes. A link is basically the segment from here to there for each of the different parts of this subassembly. A point is the actual point that you see here represented by the circular graphic. And a shape is the shape that you see here that is shaded. So what controls the display of all those different parts is something called the code set style. And every assembly is applied with a code set style. The code set style is in the General Multipurpose Styles Code Styles category. And if I go ahead and edit one of these, you'll simply notice that it just maps the codes that are called in the subassemblies to the codes and styles that you want to define here. Again, the different categories are defined in the code set style. So shape, point, and link categories. And as you can see here, it's mapping based on this code. And just so you know, the codes are case sensitive. All right, so you have to actually map the correct code within here to make it apply the correct style, render material, area fill, and pay item. So how do you know what codes are being used in your assembly? With each object type, whether it's assemblies or subassemblies, you can go to the properties. Simply select it, and in the properties palette, you can change a few things here for the assembly. However, the assembly properties is where you're going to want to go to define the majority of all the settings. For instance, for super elevation, you can actually define the assembly type. If I look at the individual parts here, you'll see these are the subassemblies that are in this assembly, and here are all the settings. If you want to know the codes that are being used in this assembly, simply click on the Codes tab, and you'll see what actual codes are being used. If you want to map a code and have it display a certain way, you would simply look at the code name, whether it's a point, link, or shape code, depending on what you want to do, and then you would make sure that this code exists in the code set style, and then apply the correct link style to the object. Subassemblies also have properties. However, the properties palette will actually be pretty much all the settings you ever need to go in and change. If I select any of the settings here, you'll notice that obviously, as you would expect, it updates automatically in the drawing, as most Civil 3D objects are dynamic in nature. So any of the settings you change here will update the adjacent components or subassemblies within your assembly. You can also go to the subassembly properties, and you can actually change the parameters here. And in fact, some of the settings, just be aware of this, some of them may be in the subassembly properties dialog box and not in the properties palette. If you want to see the actual codes being used by this subassembly, simply click the Codes tab and you'll see just this subassembly, unlike the assembly which showed you all the codes being used in all of these subassemblies. This concludes this video discussing an overview of assemblies and subassemblies. So how do you create assemblies? In the Home tab, Create Design panel, let's click on the Assembly drop down here and choose Create Assembly. In this one, we will give it a name, so we'll call this one 2-lane with sidewalk. In this case, if you do want to define this with a super elevation table, you can actually choose the assembly type. That way it helps better model the corridor model. So in this case, we'll choose divided crowned road. And for the assembly style, this just basically tells it how to draw the lines and the actual insertion point for that assembly. The code set style, as discussed in the assembly and subassembly overview video, will actually tell the subassembly components how they should display. Again, that's the point, link, and shape codes. We'll just stick with the all codes default one. Click OK. Then it's asking us to place this in the drawing. Now, what I recommend you do is you actually define some sort of area within your design or drawing to create your assemblies. That way you can easily zoom to them as you can visually see where they're located. I'll just click in space. It does automatically zoom to that specific location to show you your assembly. And that's our assembly. So how do you create subassemblies? As mentioned in the tool palette video, Civil3d leverages the AutoCAD tool palette functionality to provide a one-stop shop location for all your subassemblies. They're categorized into different tabs, and that's how you can navigate and select them to insert them into your drawing. You can also store completed assemblies in your palettes, which makes creating your design much easier and faster. So let's just create a basic roadway design, and we'll first start with the lanes palette. So before we actually place a subassembly in our file, if you ever need help or want to know what a subassembly does, as I always say when it comes to the interface, when in doubt, right-click. So right-click on Lane Super Elevation AOR, because that's the subassembly that we're interested in, and go to Help. This will open up the Help file and show you exactly what this subassembly does and all the different settings that pertain to it, including all the link, point, and shape codes. So as I scroll here and navigate, you'll see that it shows you all the different parameters and settings that can be applied to this subassembly. So let's go to the tool palette and select Lane Super Elevation AOR. As soon as you select the subassembly from the palette, you can immediately go to the Properties palette. So do not just click in the drawing and place your subassembly without actually looking at the properties that you can define. I'll go to the Properties palette. And as you can see, all the available properties are available to you to edit. So we're going to start doing the right side, and we do want a 12-foot width with a default slope. We can also change the pavement depth and even delete one of these depths if, let's say, our design does not require that there is a base depth or two pavement depths. Just simply set the value to 0. You can tell this subassembly to use super elevation and how it should slope that super elevation. If you do want to define this as a potential pivot point for the super elevation, then you would do so as well. We'll just go ahead and place this in our file because the default settings look great, and we'll just click anywhere on the assembly and it places it in our file. When you're done, press Escape to finish the subassembly creation. Now, let's say we want to add some basic curb. We'll go back to the tool palettes and notice that there's a curbs section. Urban Curb Gutter General. So I'll go ahead and click that. And I'll immediately go right to the Properties palette to see the settings that I can change there. Again, to understand what each of the dimensions does, right-click on that subassembly and go to the Help file. It'll show you, and then you can change those settings here. You can also define how you want the gutter slope direction to be, what you want that gutter slope percentage to be, and so on. We're going to put this on the right side. I'll zoom in, and this is what you want to make sure you do. Zoom into your subassemblies and then make sure you pick the right point, because that's what you're basically doing. You're connecting this subassembly to the other subassembly. I'll just go ahead and pick there, and notice how it connects it very nicely for me. Now let's say we want to actually add in a daylight subassembly. I'll press Escape, and we'll go to the tool palettes, and there are many, and I mean many, daylight scenarios. There's even conditional daylighting. There's even conditional subassemblies, which actually allow you to go through multiple scenarios based on specific conditions that might be met. We'll pick on daylight, and we'll just pick the daylight general. And then we'll go to the Properties palette, and notice how we can change many of the settings. If we want to create a ditch here, you can actually create a ditch and define what that ditch should be by simply defining the different width slopes when it goes in cut. If you want to add specific widths for the fill, you can also do that as well. If, let's say, you want, based on a certain fill slope, for the guardrail to appear, you can actually have a guardrail appear as well. Right now it says Omit Guardrail. Simply select this, and you can say Include Guardrail, so when this fill slope is met, it'll actually include the guardrail. I'll go ahead and just zoom in to our point code and then go ahead and click, and there is our subassembly. I'll press escape. Now, what's really cool about Civil 3D with subassemblies is they have these tools that make it very easy to do one side and then mirror that to the other. Or you can move, copy, etc. to different points within your subassembly if, let's say, you made a mistake. I will select all three individually, and then I will right-click. And notice the options available. I can copy to, move to, or mirror. I'll go ahead and click mirror, and then my mirror line, or mirror point, is obviously the assembly. And just like that, I now have a completed assembly. So let's say I want to add a sidewalk to this left side here. I'll go ahead and just select the daylight subassembly and delete that. And then I'll go to the Tool Palettes, Curbs tab, and choose Urban Sidewalk. I will then go to the Properties palette and first make sure that I set the side to left. And for the inside boulevard, we do want 5 feet. And for the sidewalk width, it should be 5 feet as well. And then for the outside boulevard, we only want, let's say, a 3-foot width. And of course, you can define the depth for that sidewalk as well. I'll go ahead and zoom into my curb and then select that. And just like that, I now have a sidewalk. Now, instead of having to find this daylight subassembly, again, I can simply select it, right-click, and then mirror. And then I can zoom into my location here. And just like that, it automatically applies that subassembly to the other one. This concludes this video discussing creating assemblies for corridor modeling. One of the great things about Civil 3D is that you never have to recreate your data. Editing Civil 3D objects is really, really awesome. You just have to know where to do it. So in this case, let's go ahead and look at some edits that you can make to your assemblies and your subassemblies. The first thing we want to do is take care of this exclamation point. If I hover a second over it, I'll see that it says super elevation axis of rotation error, no center pivot points exist. And the reason that is that I have applied the wrong type of assembly to this assembly. So I'll go ahead and select it and go to the assembly properties. And then in the construction tab, I can change the assembly type. So this one actually should have been an undivided crowned road. I'll click apply. And then if we look at our drawing, you'll notice that the exclamation point is gone. While we're here, let's go ahead and look at some additional editing that you can do. It is definitely recommended that as you create your subassemblies, you name them something that makes sense. Because as you're doing any kind of targeting within the corridor model, you will want to be able to see what subassembly to target, as there's no way to navigate to it while you're in the middle of the corridor modeling process. So in here, what I would probably do is I have the right side defined already, but then I would probably just go in here and actually say RT underscore and do the same thing for the other parts in here as well. I could apply the left side if I needed to, but for now, we'll just go with those. Now, one of the really cool tips here that I can provide is there's a way to actually automate the naming of subassemblies as you create them. Let's just click OK out of here, press escape. And in the Settings tab, and then Subassembly category, we'll expand this, go to Commands, and then on the Create Subassembly tool, just right-click and edit Command Settings. And then if you go to the Subassembly options, you'll notice that there's an actual area to have a subassembly name prompt turned on. All right, so I would set that to on, and then add a subassembly. So we'll just add a bogus one here. And I'll go ahead and select a subassembly to attach this to. You'll notice you get a nice, cool little name dialog box that allows you to type in here at least, let's say the RT underscore or left underscore, etc. So that's a nice little tip there. Now let's go ahead and look at our actual daylighting subassembly. And we want to change these to show, let's say, only a 2-to-1 slope in the fill area. For this bypass, we're actually going to just be doing a lot of fill, and we want to actually have a 2-to-1 slope. So we minimize impacts. So I'm going to actually select both these subassemblies as they are the same ones. And I can go to the Properties palette. And as you can see, there are many subassembly properties that you can change. If you'd like to know what each one does, just right-click on that subassembly in the Tool palette and then go to Help. So all I want to do here is change the fill slope here, where it says horizontal right now. For the minimum, maximum, and medium, we're going to just change this to 2. So I'm just typing in 2 and then Enter to get down to each one. So for a flat fill, I want 2. And then for a medium, I want 2. And also then, of course, the steep slope already is 2, so I'm all set there. We also want to add a guardrail panel, and for the guardrail width, we want 3 feet at a -4%. And let's go ahead and click on this to include the guardrail. I also want to change the width to the post to be 4 feet, and that is it for our changes. I'll press escape, and just like that, when we model now, it'll use those parameters. Now, one of the other things that I want to do is I don't like this directional arrow showing up in the label, but let's say I actually do like the label and I want to use it and have it actually be used when I cut sections. So how do you find this label style? If you remember, the code set style controls every aspect of a subassembly. So let's go ahead and navigate to the Settings tab, and we'll scroll to the top under the General category, Multi-Purpose Styles, and then if you look here, the code set style does control what labels and styles to be applied. And so if I navigate into the Label Styles category within the General category, I'll see that there are some label styles for marker, which is your point code. That would be like an offset elevation type label. Link, which is what we're seeing right here, and any shape labels that I might want to display. So if I select link, based on the name, I can assume which one it is. I could have gone into the code set style to actually see that as well, but it's steep grades. So I'm going to go ahead and double click this. And in the layout tab, you'll notice the components that are here. We have run over rise and a direction arrow. Well, let's say I might want to turn this back on, so I'm not going to delete it. I will just set the visibility to false. Click OK, and just like that, I no longer have that arrow, and I just have the slope listed. So as you can see, edits are very simple and really very cool. This concludes this video discussing modifying assemblies. So now that you've created your super duper assembly, wouldn't it be nice to be able to reproduce this very easily and quickly into, let's say, another project? And the answer is you can. And you do this through the tool palette functionality. So before I do anything, I'm going to turn auto hide off in my tool palettes by simply selecting the auto hide icon right here. And just so you know, there are some predefined assemblies for you in the Assemblies-Imperial or Assemblies-Metric, depending on which profile you're in. You can create your own tool palettes, and your company may have its own standard set of tool palettes that you may see here. To create anything new or do anything with tool palettes, as I always say, when in doubt, right-click. So if I wanted to create a new palette, I would simply right-click on here and say New Palette. However, I'm going to simply add this to the common assemblies that I would use for a project. To do this, it couldn't be easier. I select the assembly, and then I simply grab the graphic, not the grip. If you grab the grip, that'll actually move it in the drawing. And then I drag it onto the tool palette and place it wherever I want to. And just like that, it has now added that assembly and all of its settings and properties to the tool palette. So if I start a totally brand new file, it'll bring it in automatically. So where does this assembly get copied to? Is there some sort of magic that goes on and this assembly just exists in the virtual world of your computer? And the answer is there really is no magic. It simply is making a separate DWG file of this assembly and then just using tool palette functionality to place it in a file. The location for where these DWG files are located is in the All Users Path, Autodesk, Civil3d 2013, English Units, Assemblies. And here's the 2-lane with sidewalk assembly. And that is a location of where just this assembly is stored. This concludes this video discussing copying assemblies to a tool palette.